Post-authorization pharmacovigilance is designed to be methodical. It relies on the continuous accumulation of safety data over the lifespan of a medicine. This timeline illustrates a standard post-authorization safety review. Routine tools like periodic safety update reports often require months or years of data collection and regulatory negotiation before a label is updated. But real-world evidence does not always adhere to administrative schedules. Occasionally, a safety signal reveals an immediate threat that standard timelines cannot accommodate. When evidence surfaces showing unexpected teratogenicity or lethal drug-drug interactions, a months-long review timeline becomes a liability to public health. Regulators address this urgency through the Urgent Safety Restriction, or USR. A USR is a legally binding interim measure. It alters the terms of a product's marketing authorization to immediately mitigate a newly identified hazard. While a routine variation moves through several cycles of review, a USR executes within 24 to 72 hours of notification. This mechanism requires synchronization between regulators and industry, transitioning the entire safety apparatus into a high-speed intervention mode to prevent patient harm. Regulators do not deploy a USR for routine label updates or minor safety signals. Intervention requires a strict three-part threshold. First, the clinical data must demonstrate an unacceptable risk to patients under the current conditions of use. Second, the risk must be serious and urgent. Finally, the evidence must indicate that any delay in action will lead to death, life-threatening events, or significant disability. These thresholds were met in the case of natalizumab, marketed as Tysabri, when reports linked the drug to progressive multifocal leukoencephalopathy, a severe viral infection of the brain. It met the criteria for an immediate temporary suspension via a USR. A secondary example of a threshold breach occurred with the drug Benfluorex, known as Mediator. The emergence of valvular heart disease and pulmonary hypertension among active patients forced an immediate EU-wide withdrawal action. A USAR is triggered only when the clinical data proves that the standard regulatory pace will result in immediate, avoidable casualties. The process begins the moment a critical safety signal is detected, originating from the marketing authorization holder, a national authority, or global data sources. This high-priority data is immediately routed to the European Medicines Agency for emergency evaluation. The Pharmacovigilance Risk Assessment Committee, the PRAC, acts as the central analytical body for emergency data. This pathway compresses the usual cycle. The PRAC conducts a full risk assessment in just 1 to 2 weeks. They produce specific recommendations to neutralize the threat, like new contraindications or restricted distribution. These are then handed to the adoption bodies for immediate authorization. Centrally authorized products are handled by the CHMP, while the CMDH processes nationally authorized medicines. The CHMP adopts the opinion within days, rapidly finalizing a process that normally requires months of administrative review. Once adopted, the European Commission formally notifies the pharmaceutical company of the newly imposed safety restrictions. Upon notification, the responsibility for implementation resides entirely with the pharmaceutical company. The operational clock begins the second the company formally receives the notification from the authority. The company has a window of only 24 to 72 hours until the newly imposed restrictions become fully legally binding. This immediate corporate response is directed by the qualified person responsible for pharmacovigilance, or QQPV. The QPPV must lock down the product's safety profile across all core regulatory documents simultaneously. This requires updates to the Summary of Product Characteristics to explicitly define the new contraindications. The Patient Information Leaflet and Risk Management Plan must also be updated in tandem to align the entire data stack. This creates a massive logistical sprint, requiring changes to be implemented globally across local affiliates and translated markets within hours. However, paperwork updates are ineffective if prescribing physicians remain unaware of the new risks. Pharmaceutical companies issue a direct healthcare professional communication, often referred to as a red hand letter, as an external failsafe. These letters are often mandated for distribution directly to frontline healthcare providers within 48 hours. These notifications force prescribers and pharmacists to immediately halt or alter treatments for active patients. Failing to execute these changes within the 72-hour window results in immediate regulatory penalties and leaves patients exposed to identified harm. A USR is rarely the final regulatory action for a medicine with a newly identified risk. It is strictly an interim measure, designed to be temporary. The mechanism locks down the immediate hazard, so a comprehensive scientific evaluation can take place safely. This leads into a formal referral procedure, such as an Article 20 or 107I review, which dictates the permanent fate of the authorization. The USR provides the time required for an exhaustive evaluation without leaving the patient population exposed to the risk in the interim. From signal detection to corporate execution, the USR sequence is built for velocity. In an era of complex biologics and advanced therapy medicinal products, this regulatory speed is a requirement for patient safety. The mechanism applies the rigor of regulatory oversight to a timeline built for clinical emergencies. This placement of responsibility on the QPPV and the company ensures that safety evidence results in action. For every hour of delayed execution, patients remain exposed to a risk that has already been clinically confirmed. By rapidly restricting access for vulnerable populations, these measures preserve the safe use of important medicines for those who still benefit from them. The urgent safety restriction demonstrates pharmacovigilance as a protective force. It shows that when new risks emerge, the regulatory system can pivot from surveillance to decisive action within days.